Today's message is called, Where Did You Pitch God's Tent? Where did you pitch God's tent? In trying to hear from God about what to speak about today, one story came to mind. It's in the Old Testament, and it came to mind because it's a crazy story. It's a crazy story. We're going to talk about a little bit about the things that led to the incident with the golden calf in Israel. So just to set the scene for those of you who don't know the story, God chose Israel as his chosen people. And he worked with this guy named Abraham, and he said, I'm going to work with your family, your descendants. And that was true for a long time, and then his people fell into slavery in Egypt. God says, you know what? It is time for my people to be free. I want to free them from slavery so they can come to me and they can worship me. So he sends this guy named Moses to tell Pharaoh, the head of Egypt, to let his people go so they can go to the wilderness and worship God. Pharaoh wasn't having it. He said, nah, not doing it. So then what did God do to convince Pharaoh that this was the right idea? He sent him plagues.
A lot of plagues.
And not just ordinary plagues. I don't know if there's such a thing as an ordinary plague. But I never heard of plagues like this. Tell me some of the things that happened.
Flies
and frogs.
Boils,
locusts.
blood.
Water into blood. Listen. Right? That's heavy stuff, man. You know, yellow flies are in my neighborhood.
Oh, poor rabbit.
So they had me at flies.
Yeah.
I've been like, you know what, let them go, I don't care. Walking rabbit, I look like I'm speaking sign language because I'm all like trying to swat them because they keep trying to bite my head.
Poor rabbit, he's trying to bite them.
Yeah, my poor dog tries to bite me. It's awful. It's awful, right? So they had me at flies. But all these things happen. And so Pharaoh finally says, okay. Changes his mind, but God changes it back. Long story short, the Israelites are free in the wilderness. And now the moment comes. He leads them to Mount Sinai. And he manifests his presence. They feel thunder, and they feel rumblings, and they see a cloud. And the cloud starts in the mountain, it descends to the ground. And a voice comes out of the cloud and says, come to me, my children. This is the moment. This is what we went all through this for. This is it. Israelites say, nah. Kind of scary with all that smoke. You're just way extra, God. It's a lot. The only one to step forward was Moses and Joshua, I believe, because wherever Moses went, Joshua said, me too. Right? And so God says, man, I expected more. No, he didn't. But it's like, wow, okay. So we're going to work with Moses. So Moses goes up on the mountain to commune with God, where God is going to share with Moses his ways of living inside this covenant. Right? He's going to make a covenant with Israel. He's going to promise things to them. And he's going to show you, he's going to teach Moses how do you live inside this covenant relationship with him. And Moses is up there for 40 days. And God let people know that he was there because that cloud wrapped its way around the entire top of the mountain. Right? And during that whole time, God is communing with Moses, God's presence. You could physically see it there as he's communing with Moses. 40 days go, right? During that time, God tells Moses, hey, I want you to start writing this stuff down. Right? This is pretty good stuff I'm sharing, right? And what comes out of it is the 10 Commandments on these 2 big stone tablets. And Moses is beaming. He's like, man, that was awesome, right? I spent some time with God. It was all that, man. And I got these tablets. I'm going to show him, right? And he starts walking down the mountain. And what he finds is the Israelites had built themselves a golden calf and are worshiping it. And Moses goes over to his brother Aaron. He's like, you had one job. You had one job. Right? And now look at this. And what the Bible says is that Moses he made a comment that, we're a laughing stock with all the nations. Apparently people were looking at them, and it was even a lot for them. They were just like, wow, I mean, we dance around idols, but not like that. I mean, those Israelites, they're losing their mind. So Moses gets mad. He takes the stone tablets and he smashes them, right? He grinds the calf into powder and makes the people drink it. Drink this. You don't mess up. You need to sit with this for a little while, right? And so then Moses goes back up on the mountain. And there, he and God have a really, really interesting conversation. Because God says to Moses, listen, you go ahead, you lead the people into the promised land, but I'm not coming. The fullness of my presence, I'm not going to go. I'll send my angel to lead you, but I'm not going. Now, there's something that you need to understand about these Old Testament conversations that God had with his followers, right? He did some of this stuff with Abraham. He does this with Moses. He does this with others, right? It's not really like God is having a conversation. He's trying to get his followers to understand certain things about him, right? He's trying to get them to see things, and he's trying to reveal to them his very heart and nature. And he also wants them to actively participate, right? He doesn't want to just tell them everything. He wants them to feel like they are participating in the things that God is doing. Right? So he has this conversation with Moses. He's like, Moses, I ain't coming, Because listen, if I come, I got to judge them. Right? If I come, and if they do something like this again, I got to judge them for it. I don't want to do that. So Moses said, you got it. God, you set all this up, man. You gotta, man, this is your thing, man. Listen, you gotta come. Come on, man. Don't be like that. Don't be like that, God, right? So God's like, fine, all right. I'll go, but listen. There's some things that we gotta talk about. And so it leads to another long conversation between God and Moses about God sharing more about what he would like to see and how he thinks things should happen. In the midst of this, it's almost like something that really doesn't fit. And you know me by now, when something seems like it really doesn't fit, I can't just let that go, church, right? I got to look into that. So Moses starts telling this story about the tent of meeting is what it's called, right? The tent of meeting is the place where Moses and God would encounter each other, would speak face to face as friends. This tent of meeting. This is the precursor to the tabernacle. The tabernacle is where the fullness of God dwelled with Israel as they went through. The tabernacle is just a really, really nice tent that they would set up and had very special symbolic instruments, and it had a really deep symbolic meaning. But it's something that followed the Israelites around. So Moses is writing this story about this conversation he's having with God, and then he pauses and he says, this is how we used to set up the tent of meeting. And it's understanding where the tent of meeting was set up and how it was set up that led me to understand how the golden calf incident happened. Because the question I had was, how could this happen? God is amazing. He led them out of Egypt. He was a cloud by day and fire by night in the sky leading them. He caused a sea to part, and they could walk across on dry land, and that sea came back together. He sent plagues, and you know how I feel about flies, but God sent flies and locusts and all kinds of things to get them free. How can they turn on God so quickly? And the answer came to me. It's where they pitched the tent of meeting. In Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. I should hear pages rustling because you can't see it. Make sure I'm not lying. Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. It says, "Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp, some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent." Just an aside, the Old Testament, especially the first 5 books of the Bible, if you look at the things Joshua did, he was always breaking the rules. It says no one else did this but Joshua, except Joshua. He was always following Moses. He's like, I know I'm not supposed to be in here, but here I am, because I'm not leaving you. And even God was like, okay, everyone else gets struck down, but you, Joshua, it's cool. All right, I love Joshua, right? We can learn a lot from him, but that's not what I'm talking about today. What we're talking about is this tent of meeting. Where was it?
Far outside the camp.
Outside the camp. A good distance outside. It says some distance away from the camp. Yes? And when Moses went into the tent, where did the Israelites go?
To their own tent.
To their own tent, where? Like right in the doorway, right?
Yes.
So what is the interaction between the Israelites and God? What is the connection between God and most of the Israelites?
Moses.
Yeah, Moses had an intimate relationship with him, but other than Moses, what was the relationship like? It was distant.
Moses was to them like God was to Moses.
Yes. Yes. And so they saw more so Moses as God
Yeah.
than having a direct relationship with God. Right? So they didn't talk to God face to face. They didn't meet him face to face. They didn't even go to the temple, to the tent of meeting, unless they had an urgent concern. Oh, wait a second. You know that saying, there's no atheists in foxholes? The only time they would approach the place where they can meet God is when they had a desperate need. Other than that, they worship God from their own tent, some distance away. Do you understand where I'm going with this, church? Now, do you think this is what God wanted? Do you think this is the setup that he wanted? What he called for? Let's look at what he wanted. In Numbers chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. This is after God gives Moses extensive instructions about the setup of this thing called the tabernacle. This is a special tent, like I just said. And God was meticulous with every single detail of the tabernacle. Every tool, every piece of equipment that went along with the tabernacle, even the hinges, the things that held it together, he had something to say about it. And then what he does is that he says where he wants it to be. And here's what the Lord says. Numbers 2, verses 1 and 2. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "The Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting some distance from it, each of them under their standard and holding the banner of their family." And then he gives extensive details about where they're supposed to be. The little map here shows how it was set up, how the Israelite camp was set up. Where is the tabernacle? In the center. All of Israel is facing that tabernacle. In the center of the camp. God did not want to be on the outskirts. He did not want to be some distance away. He wants to be in the midst of the camp, in the very center of the life of Israel. And that's not something he just wanted back then. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And guess what? He wants to be in the center still. John chapter 1, verses 14. It says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." I highlighted these words, "made his dwelling," which is how the NIV translates it. Do you know what that term literally means? He pitched his tent with us. The Greek term literally means pitch your tent or pitch your tabernacle. Isn't that an incredible image of what Jesus came to do? He did not just come to be with us. He pitched his tent in our midst. He set up a dwelling place here with us, his children and his friends. Glory to the living God. God wanted and wants to be intimately connected to his children. And this does not change. The only question that changes is this one. Where did you pitch God's tent in your life? Where is God's tent pitched in your life? Is he at the center or is he on the outskirts? Are you open and intimate and having a transformative relationship with God? Or you just call on him when life gets tough? When you feel like there's a situation you're having trouble dealing with, then you turn to God. Do you worship him from a distance? Or do you step outside your comfort zone and lay yourself at his feet to worship him? Do you invite God to be present in your home, at school, or at your job? Or is God just a friend you hang out with on Sundays? I don't want to shame anyone here, and that's not the purpose of this message. The purpose of this message is to get you to take a hard look at how involved you allow God to be in your life. Because when you don't allow God to be at the center, you run the risk of building up that golden calf. Of raising up things that you exalt to the level that only God should ascend to. You risk having other smaller gods that don't care about you, that don't listen to you, that don't know you. Even good things, like school, like work. These can become gods. These can be your golden calves. Even your family. The question is, what drives your decision? What is the thing that you base every decision upon? Is God really at the center of your camp? Or has it been moved to the outskirts? I'll tell you, church, this is a question that we have to continually ask ourselves. And do you know who is the most susceptible to this? This message is more for me, so if you're getting hit by it, I'm getting hit harder. Because it's so easy to get caught up in the business of God that I don't make time for God himself. Because I'm doing good things. But being a Christian is not about doing good things. Do you understand that, church? Being a Christian is about being in a relationship. And the reason why you're hearing this message is because God is challenging me, Daishan, where have you pitched my tent in your life? And I tell you, church, when he is at the center, when he is at the center. And I'm not saying that your life gets better and everything changes when God's at the center. No, but you change. I've been working hard at putting God back at the center. And I've experienced some things that would have really demoralized me in the past. But I see God and I see his hand this time, right? And I'm encouraged and I'm strengthened. I'm excited in God. Right? The honest truth is I'm supposed to be at camp right now. I'm not even supposed to be here, typically. But God had a different plan. And because he has a different plan, I'm not saying, God, how could you let this happen? I'm saying, God, I know you're doing amazing things. You only do things that are good and things that will bless me. So I'm looking for your blessing in my life right now. That's what it means to have God at the center, where you see everything through the reality of who he is. That you don't even allow yourself to decide what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. You ask him what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, because he is the center. Church, I encourage you to let God get all the way in. Let him be at the center of your life. Pitch his tent in the center of your camp. That's how you were made. That's what you were made for, that intimate relationship. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you want to live in our midst, Lord God. You don't want to be on the outskirts of our camp. You want to be right in the center of our lives. In fact, that's why Jesus came, to establish that relationship and connection so that nothing or no one can separate us. And I pray that we would stop holding ourselves back from experiencing that incredible relationship, Lord. Help us to move the things out of the way that are golden calves, Lord. Things that we have raised up to take your place that are not fitting of us or of you. Lord, I pray that we would allow only you to occupy that space of honor at the center of our lives, Lord. We thank you so much and we give you glory in Jesus' name.